As the introduction scenes begin, I decide to name my character Ash and my rival Gary, since that's what the guide refers to these characters as. Now that I'm in the actual game, I take the bottle of healing potion out of the PC and say goodbye to my mother as the guide says. I then head into the grass where Professor Oak, I guess we're done calling him Dr. Oak, comes by to get me and also catch a Pikachu in the process. He then takes me back to his lab where we meet Gary, who takes the Eevee that Professor Oak was about to give us to be our starter Pokemon, so Oak just gives us the Pikachu he just caught in the wild. Before we leave the lab though, Gary challenges us to a Pokemon duel as the guide calls it, and I never knew this about Yellow version, but depending on how this battle goes and the optional battle on Route 22 goes, that determines what his Eevee will evolve into. Since I unfortunately ended up losing this first fight, it means that Gary's Eevee will evolve into a Vaporeon, which is favorable for us since it's a water type and gets type trunked by our electric type Pikachu. This leads us into Route 1 where we can get a free potion as well as a small excerpt about the two Pokemon you encounter here being Pidgey and Rattata. I thought this was an interesting little quote that the guide has where it says that Rattata shares this area peacefully with Pidgey, so I guess that means that these two Pokemon are actually friends in the Pokemon world. I make it into Viridian City next, which the guide says isn't exactly a bustling burg, where the first thing we have to do is pick up the parcel from the Pokemart to deliver it back to Professor Oak in Pallet Town. I deliver it to him, get the Pokedex, and pick up the town map from Gary's sister on my way back. I then go back into Viridian City and check out the Pokemon Center, which the guide also calls the Pokemon Hospital in this diagram. I guess it's just referring to the actual healing portion of the Pokemon Center, but I just never heard of it being called the Pokemon Hospital before. It then mentions the optional rival battle on Route 22, and only lists his team for if you're playing Pokemon Yellow version, although this guide is supposed to be for Red and Blue as well, and that rival battle exists in Red and Blue too. Since all of the screenshots are from Yellow version in this guide though, I'm guessing they just played Yellow version while making this guide, and then referenced an older Red and Blue guide when necessary. I just skipped this rival fight though since it doesn't say anything about Route 22 yet, and I make it up to Route 2 where I caught a Nidoran and named it Arthur. This leads us into the Viridian Forest where the guide doesn't really tell us much to do besides saying that it's easy to get lost in here, although most of it is just one straight path. I also noticed that there's these circles around some of the trainers on the map, which is used to distinguish between trainers that appear between Red, Blue, and Yellow version, since there's some small differences between each game. After finally making it to the other side of the forest into Pewter City, it has this weird extra about the museum here. It says, some scientists claim to have cloned new Pokemon from fossils, but most experts think this is just a lot of Jurassic mumbo jumbo. The only thing left for us to do here now is to challenge the gym, however since all I really have is Pikachu with electric type moves, the guide says that electric moves won't do much damage at all against Brock's ground type Pokemon. It recommends that I use water, grass, or fighting types for this gym, however I don't have any of those types yet, and the guide hasn't pointed out any areas where I can catch one of those types yet, as it outlines what Pokemon can be caught in each area as well. I know that I can find Mankeys on Route 22 in Yellow version, but the guide made no mention of the wild Pokemon on Route 22 yet and didn't even bother showing Route 22 at all, despite the screenshot of the gym battle showing the guide writer using a Mankey for this. I decide to look in the back of the guide to see what the level up movesets are for my Pokemon, and I noticed that Arthur the Nidoran can learn Double Kick at level 12, which is a fighting type move, great for this gym. This is our best chance of beating Brock, so I level up Arthur to level 12 and hammer away at the gym with double kicks to get the victory and get our first gym badge as intended. We have to go through Route 3 next, which has a lot of trainers for us to dispatch. I caught a Spearow here since the guide says I should catch a Pokemon here, and I named it Wing since I couldn't really think of any other nicknames. I stopped by the Pokemon Center for the Mount Moon, and the guide mentions the Magikarp salesman, just like the Fire Red guide did. It says a traveling salesman at the Pokemon Center will offer you a sweet deal on a Magikarp, but don't you think you'll be able to catch one for free later on? Now I know that I can catch one later on, but since when I make these intended videos, I try and act like I've never played these games and try to follow the guide as closely as possible using only information found in the guide, I actually don't technically know that. I skip the Magikarp, even though I always like to buy one when I play through the Kanto games though. I managed to get through Mount Moon pretty quickly here since the guide has an easy map for us to follow through, and I end up getting the Moonstone too, which we might end up using later on to evolve one of our Pokemon. The guide also mentioned that there is an item hidden on this rock here, although it didn't say anything about the hidden potion in the tree in Viridian City, which I thought was interesting. I guess that they only found some of the hidden items and not all of them. I eventually make it to the end where we can pick one of our fossils, and the title for this section is called Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, and then it goes on to say that if I can't make up my mind on which fossil to pick, I can always fall back on a certain tried and true method for making choices, so I did Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo on the fossils to end up picking the Helix fossil. Before we exit Mount Moon though, we have the yellow version exclusive Team Rocket battle against Jesse and James, which was a fun little addition to this game on top of Red and Blue. There's even a few other anime references in Pokemon Yellow like this later on in the game, which I thought was a really nice touch. After exiting Mount Moon, this takes us into Cerulean City. The guide mentions how we can get a smooth ride in the form of a bike, although it will set us back a cool 1 million Pokédollars, and that ain't just Pokemon feed. There's also a trading post where you can trade a Poliwhirl for a Jinx in Red and Blue version, but in Yellow version there's somebody in there who gives you a Bulbasaur instead if your Pikachu likes you enough. I wasn't able to get the Bulbasaur yet, so I'll try later on, so next up we have to challenge Misty's Water Gym. I always prefer to go up north first and challenge my rival and help Bill before challenging Misty to get a few extra levels before the gym fight, but just like it said in the Fire Red guide, it wants me to battle Misty first, so I guess this really is the intended way. I splashed around the junior trainers in the gym like the guide said, and prepared to make big waves by challenging Misty. My Pikachu is only level 16 here, which is a little bit low, so I actually end up losing the first fight to Misty since I wasn't able to do enough damage. I train my Pikachu a couple of levels and head back in anyway, and get through it much easier since my super effective electric moves are doing much more damage to her water Pokemon now. This gives us the second badge, aka the Cascade badge, and the TM for Bubble Beam, which is a pretty good TM in the Generation 1 games. Now the guide says to head north and fight my rival, and only lists his team for Yellow version again. I use Pikachu against him, which will work wonders against his team as the guide put it, and then head across the Nugget Bridge to get Charmander, which I named Henry. Under the section about Charmander, the guide has this funny quote about the Team Rocket grunt on the Nugget Bridge too, saying, "They'll offer you a position on their terrible team. Of course, an upstanding person like you would never join evil misfits like them." I also decided to use my Moonstone here on Arthur since in the back of the guide it says I can evolve him with a Moonstone, making him much stronger. After helping out Bill, I then head south onto Route 5 and through the daycare. The guide says how the daycare is used to level up Pokemon as I walk around in the overworld, and says the best way to use the daycare is to deposit low-level Pokemon like Magikarp or Abra, which don't do too much early on, but can be very strong when they level up a bit and evolve. Right now I don't really have any extra Pokemon to spare to use in the daycare, so I continue through and make it into Vermilion City. Around here, and a couple of times later on in the guide, it also mentions these little outposts where the guards are, suggesting they are hiding something that they're also thirsty, which we'll have to revisit later. In Vermilion City, I get the fishing rod and the bike voucher as the guide says, and then go onto the SS Anne so we can get the HM for Cut. It has a nice walkthrough of the SS Anne, making it easy to find the captain's room, but before we get up there I challenge a few other trainers in the ship and also do the rival fight. Gary's team is basically the same as before, and it only shows his yellow team again, even though this rival fight is also red and blue. So I go through this fight pretty easily with Pikachu and Arthur. I then go upstairs and collect the HM for Cut, and now all that's left to do in Vermilion City is to challenge the gym leader, Lieutenant Surge. While most of these small paragraphs about each important fight in the guide don't really tell us much about how to win the fight, the section about battling Surge actually suggests that you catch a ground type, like maybe a Geodude or two from the Dark Cave, if you caught multiple for some reason, and if you don't have any Geodudes, you could also go into the nearby Diglett's Cave to catch a Diglett or Doug trio instead. This is very helpful and convenient for Surge since a strong ground type will easily knock out his sole Raichu. In Yellow version, Surge only has a level 28 Raichu, while in Red and Blue he has 3 total Pokemon. I go through the Diglett Cave and get lucky and catch a Doug trio, which I named Doug. Once I make it to the other side of the Diglett's Cave though, it actually tells me to get the HM for Flatch, which will make getting through the Dark Cave later on actually tolerable, although the guide says that you find the HM in the first house you see on this route when it's actually the second one. It then says to go to Pewter City to use Cut so I can access this part of the museum and get the old Amber for later on. Then it tells me to go back to Cerulean City to get the bike by going through Mount Moon from Pewter City. I think it would make it much easier to just go back through the Diglett's Cave and then make it into Cerulean City that way, but I do as the guide says and go through Mount Moon again anyway. Henry the Charmander also evolved somewhere in this time, and now that we got the bike and made it all the way back to Vermilion City, we can challenge Lieutenant Surge. I use my new Dug Trio like the guide suggests and hammer away with a couple of digs to one-shot every Pokemon in this gym, including Lieutenant Surge's Raichu. I also noticed a small typo here where they forget to put a space between the words fight and the right here. While these guides typically have a few mistakes throughout them, whether they're a Nintendo Power Guide or a Prima Guide, I don't recall ever seeing a spelling error before. We defeat the gym within 2 shakes of a lamb's tail though, and also got the TM for Thunderbolt, which is a very good TM to have. Now we have to head back to Cerulean City and into Route 9 so we can go through the Dark Cave. I pick up the Bulbasaur along the way and name it Soar since my Pikachu finally likes me enough, and decide to level up my Charmeleon a little bit more to have more type diversity on our team. I eventually make it into the Dark Tunnel and teach Flash to Pikachu so we can actually see. The guide has an easy to follow map to help us getting through, as well as this weird excerpt titled Into the Dark. It says, the wild Pokemon in Rock Tunnel seem to attack more often than their above ground cousins, and if you're being attacked every few steps, it may take you a while to reach medical attention. If you want to avoid a lot of random combat, it would be a good time to try the Repel Potion, which keeps minor Pokemon at bay. You'll have a much tougher time, however, avoiding the many trainers lurking in the shadows. If you want to avoid a duel, walk a path that's far away from the trainer or that's out of the trainer's line of sight. Now I understand what the guide is saying here, but it uses some weird terminology you don't normally see in Pokemon games like combat, duels, and Repel Potion. I finally make it into Lavender Town, which we'll have to return to later, and thankfully I also noticed that the guide also has the return visits later on in the page, rather than putting the return visits for when you have to return to certain towns on the same page as when you first go to them. This makes it a little bit less confusing, but I also noticed another strange paragraph, this time about the Pokemon Tower. It says, "We're no Molder or Scully, but it seems to us that something sinister is going on in Pokemon Tower. And it's not just swamp gas. To find out what this eeriness is all about, you must first identify the ghosts that are roaming the halls. The only device that can do that is called a Sylph Scope. Rumor has it you can obtain a Sylph Scope in Celadon City, so it's time to hit the road again." There isn't really anything else for us to do here now, so I hit the road again and continue along into the next route through the underground and into Celadon City, where we have a lot to do. First up, I check out the department store and buy a Pokédoll and Evolution Stone since it tells me to do that for some reason. I then head into the mansion and pick up my free Eevee, and check out the game corner, which the guide says, as they say in the movies, everything seems legit in the game corner, at least at first glance, alluding to when we have to come back here later on to fight Team Rocket. The guide also says we can investigate the game corner now or battle the gym leader Erica first, so I decided to battle Erica first since the guide has that section first before the game corner. I have Henry the Charmeleon, making this a favorable gym for us since it is a fire type like the guide suggests that I use, and I even battle all of the junior trainers to get as much XP as I can since Erica's Pokemon are actually quite high compared to what my team is. I then fight Erica and zig when she zags with my Charmeleon to collect the 4th gym badge, the Rainbow Badge. I also noticed that Erica has a different Team in Yellow version compared to Red and Blue, where her Pokemon are now higher levels than they were in Red and Blue, but she has 2 middle evolution Pokemon instead of the final form she had in Red and Blue. The next thing we have to do is clear out the Team Rocket hideout under the game corner. It has a map for us to follow to make this pretty easy, and this excerpt says the key to reaching Giovanni's office is literally that, a key, and then tells me how to get a lift key. I eventually make it to the point where Jesse and James waltz in, as the guide puts it, but they were a piece of cake as usual, as the guide says again. This leads us into the Giovanni fight, and for some reason it doesn't detail the fight as much as it details most other important fights, like the fight we just had against Jesse and James. It does tell me his team members, which include an Onix and a Rhyhorn, but then it goes on to say that one of the types I should use against him are fire, despite most of his team resisting fire. I used Charmeleon against him anyway since it's a fire type and we're apparently supposed to use a fire type, and despite being not very effective in most turns of this battle, we get the victory and the Sylph Scope. The next page details the Pokemon Tower events, so we have to backtrack to Lavender Town for it. Luckily, we don't have to flip back in the pages for this one, making it a little bit easier to follow in this guide. The section here has a line that reads, "The situation in Pokemon Tower is grave indeed. which is a rather morbid joke to make about an actual gravesite in this game. Shortly after entering the tower, we have a rival battle though, but it doesn't tell me what types to use or really anything important at all, and it also says that his EV might have evolved at this point. In my case, the EV didn't evolve yet, and I don't really understand what triggers his EV to evolve in this game. I just assumed that your rival's EV would evolve at the same time in every game. It would just be a different evolution depending on how your early rival battles went, so I'm not really sure why it said might have evolved here. It then goes on to detail the healing area on the 5th floor of the Pokemon Tower, and has this really weird explanation for why you can heal here, saying, "The leader of the channelers has broken free of the dark power that held her and created a reusable healing zone on the 5th floor. Enter this area to restore your Pokemon to full health." I feel like the guide writer definitely made that whole thing up to explain why you can heal there, but after battling the Ghost Marowak, I head upstairs to fight Jesse and James, and dispatch them rather quickly. After completing all the events in the Pokemon Tower, we can now head into Saffron City by handing a guard a drink that we got earlier, and one of the first things it wants to do here is pick up the TM for Psychic from Mr. Psychic. It then goes in on Mr. Psychic for some reason by saying, "The so-called Mr. Psychic claims he can read the mind of anyone who walks in his door. He says that if you visit him, he'll give you whatever TM you're thinking about as a present. Go ahead, try it. You weren't thinking about TM29. Oh, well, maybe that's why he was booted out of the Psychic Friends network." I'm starting to notice a lot more weirder lines as we go on in this guide, but after that I hammer away at the fighting dojo, pick up Hitmonchan of course, which I named Jackie, and the next thing the guide has listed is the gym fight with Sabrina. We can't do this yet since the Rocket Grunt is still blocking the gym, and she's supposed to be the 6th gym leader technically, not the 5th, although there is some discrepancy with that. Some Pokemon fans think it's the other way around. But it doesn't specifically outline if Sabrina is the 6th gym leader or the 5th gym leader in this guide. Either way, I have to go into the Silph first anyway to make the Rocket Grunt move, and I use Doug a lot here since it's becoming one of my best Pokemon and one of my highest level Pokemon. I eventually make it to the top of the building. We have to fight Jesse and James once more for like the 3rd time in 30 minutes, and I feel like this guide says the same general thing about each fight with them, saying how they're easy and psychic moves will help here, although unfortunately I don't have any psychic moves on my team at the moment. This then takes us into the rival fight where the guide suggests ground and electric types, which is perfect for us, and then the Giovanni fight, which for some reason it doesn't outline much at all again. If you look at the page where these fights are, it even has them listed in the wrong order where the Giovanni fight is listed first, so I don't really understand why they aren't fully outlining Giovanni's team like they are with Jesse and James's team. Either way, I beat my rival pretty quickly as well, and then I short-circuit Giovanni's scheme as the guide puts it, and for doing so we received the Master Ball for saving the Silph president. Next I challenge Sabrina since I think that's what the guide wants me to do, and looking at the screenshot of the fight, it has the guide writer using a level 32 Pokemon when battling her, which is around where my Pokemon are. She has 3 level 50 Pokemon, which is quite the level jump compared to the previous gym, and I noticed that the guide recommends that I use Psychic type Pokemon against her to lull her Pokemon to sleep. I decide to go out and catch a Drowsy, which I named Rudy since it has the move Hypnosis nearby, and use it to put Sabrina's Abra to sleep in the fight. This is a pretty scary gym nonetheless, and the guide even says how her Abra, Kadabra, and Alakazam have massive brain power, and it could be a long battle. I decide to switch in Doug after Rudy puts her Abra to sleep, then proceed to spam Earthquakes with Doug for the victory. I didn't really expect to use Doug so much in this playthrough since I only caught it to use against Lieutenant Surge in the 3rd gym since the guide said I needed to use a ground type, but now it's our best Pokemon. The guide then tells us to go to Lavender Town and head south to go into Fuchsia City, although going down Cycling Road would be much easier, would be a lot faster. The Prima Fire Red and Leaf Green guide said to do this as well, which is kind of interesting. I go the long way around into Fuchsia City anyway, and set out some worms with my old rod like the guide said I could to catch a Magikarp on this route by fishing. I then play some sweet music to wake up the Snorlax, knock it out, and make my way into Fuchsia City. The first thing I do here is head to the Safari Zone so we can find the Warden's lost teeth to later exchange for an HM of Strength, and also get the HM for Surf in the Safari Zone. I follow the guide to find the items we need, and then return the gold teeth to get the Strength HM. All that's left to do now in Fuchsia City is fight the gym leader Koga, who has a completely different team in yellow version compared to his red and blue team. I have a ground type like the guide recommends for this gym and just hammer away with Doug yet again to get this victory in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. I expected this gym to be easier than Sabrina's since it is technically supposed to be before Sabrina's, but as a kid I remember having a lot of trouble with Koga. I then decide to go into the power plant, since in the paragraph the guide has about getting the Surf HM, it also recommends that I visit the power plant after I'm able to use Surf outside of battle. I head to the power plant using my Pokemon as a makeshift boat, as the guide put it, and go right in to catch Zapdos. The guide recommends that I get it low before I capture it, and I do that, and I also use Ultra Balls, but after throwing an Ultra Ball I end up missing, and I keep missing no matter how many Ultra Balls or even Great Balls that I threw. I unfortunately end up whiting out actually to the level 50 Zapdos, losing the fight against Zapdos, being unable to catch it. I know that I could have saved right before the Zapdos to reset my game to retry the capture if I really wanted to, but the guide didn't say anything about saving my game before it and trying again if in case I failed the capture, so I didn't do that. I also didn't want to waste my Master Ball just yet either, so instead I just head back into Fuchsia City so we can surf down to Cinnabar Island. It takes us this way into Cinnabar instead of surfing south of Pallet Town, which would be easier, because the guide wants us to check out the Seafoam Islands on the way. I head to the Seafoam Islands and follow the guide exactly to the path where Articuno is, and this time I just use my Master Ball to catch Articuno, since it's a high level and right now the only Pokemon I'm using are Doug the Dugtrio and Henry, who recently evolved to Charizard. This gives us a third good high level Pokemon, which I name Elsa since I couldn't think of another name and I'm struggling to come up with good nicknames on this run. I also taught it Blizzard since I happen to have the TM for it. After that we get into Cinnabar Island, and the guide has an interesting excerpt about Cinnabar Island that alludes to Mewtwo, saying a genetically engineered Pokemon broke free of its cage here and escaped, demolishing the lab in the process. The first thing I do is visit another lab here and exchange our fossils so they can revive it, and then go into the Pokemon mansion so we can find the key to open up the door to Blaine's gym. The guide made finding the key in the mansion very simple and straightforward with the maps, and since I have it now I head straight into Blaine's gym right after this and fight most of the junior trainers in the area for extra experience. The guide recommends that I bring a burn heal, but the Cinnabar Island shop doesn't sell any, so I just use a full heal instead, which does the same thing, although I don't end up even needing it. It also recommends that I use ground types as well and water types, and you guessed it, Doug hammers away at another gym for a quick victory. I did teach Surf to Nidoking just in case so I could use it if I really wanted to, but it's such a low level that it wasn't even worth it, and I probably should do some grinding later on, at least before the Giovanni fight. Now that we have the 7th gym badge thanks to Doug, all that's left to do is collect the 8th gym badge, defeat the Elite Four, and then become the champion to beat Pokemon Yellow version as intended. For the 8th gym battle against Giovanni, I see that the guide suggests water, ground, and psychic moves, and since I've been using Doug for so long, I decide to level up Arthur the Nidoking a little bit for this gym, since it's a ground type with a water type move in Surf, which seems like it'll be pretty good here. Giovanni's Pokemon are all in the 50s, but share common weaknesses that my team can take advantage of. I decided to lead with Arthur against him, thinking Surf will do a number on his team, but Dugtrio actually one-shots me with Fissure. The guide makes no mention of him having Fissure, which is an OHKO move, which I thought was surprising since it can easily catch you off guard like it did with me. I then just go into Doug, the ground type Dugtrio, and spam Earthquakes to finish off this fight, getting the 8th and final gym badge of the Kanto region. Now we have to head west of Viridian City and into the Victory Road, but on the way we're stopped by Gary for another rival battle. It tells me to bring fire, water, electric, ground, and ice moves, which is perfect for us since we have all of those types covered on our various Pokemon. It also interestingly only lists his yellow team for this fight yet again, despite the guide being for red and blue as well, but I get through this rival battle pretty quickly. This then takes us into Victory Road, where the guide has an outline for how to get through it and where to put each boulder, and also showcases Moltres here, which I end up killing the Moltres by accident as well, just like I did with Zapdos. I eventually make it to the other side of Victory Road and into the Indigo Plateau, where I stuck up on items and grind my team up to about level 50, since the level gap between the Elite Four goes as high as 65, and prior to grinding, all of my Pokemon were only in the 40s. I'll also recap the team here in case anybody forgot it. We have our starter, Pikachu of course, Arthur the Nidoking, Henry the Charizard, Jaggy the Hitmonchan, which is a low level and really is only just here because I needed something to use strength in the Victory Road, Elsa the Articuno, and finally MVP of the run, Doug the Dugtrio. I head into Lorelei's room first for the Elite Four, the mistress of icy Pokemon as the guide puts it. It recommends fire, rock, and fighting types here since they all have a combat advantage against ice types. I lead with Henry since it's a fire type, although fire really isn't all that great against Lorelei's team since most of our Pokemon are part water type or have water type moves. This ends up going by rather poorly for us actually, since Charizard falls very early on since fire types really aren't that great here. And eventually I managed to knock out a couple of other Pokemon with the rest of my team before I finally lost to her. I decided to go right back in and save my Charizard for later on in the fight rather than leading with it like I did in the first time. Next up we have Bruno's room, and the guide recommends flying and psychic type Pokemon for his fighting types, so Charizard really shines here, while I use Nidoking for his 2 Onixes, although it doesn't say anything about what to use against his 2 rock type Onixes. After that we have to take on Agatha, and the first line for her fight in the guide says, if it's a challenge you want, then Agatha is ready to deliver. It tells me to focus on ground type attacks as well as fire attacks for some reason, so I use Doug to earthquake half of her team and flamethrowers from Henry since for some reason the guide wants to use fire types against Agatha. Now we have to take on the last member of the Elite Four, the dragon type trainer Lance. The guide recommends ice type attacks here, so this is Elsa's time to shine, especially since I haven't really used her too much yet. Blizzards and Ice Beam take out most of Lance's team with ease, but the Dragonite ends up outspeeding Elsa and knocks it out, giving me a little bit of trouble. I keep hammering away though with my other Pokemon since it's basically a 5v1 now since all he has left is Dragonite, and eventually get the victory. I heal up after this fight, and finally we have one last battle against the champion, which happens to be our rival, Gary. The guide acknowledges Gary's team in red and blue here despite not acknowledging his red and blue team at any other point in the guide, and has this chart to show what his team will be since in Pokemon Red and Blue his team varies based on which starter Pokemon you picked, and in Yellow version his team varies based on what his Eevee evolved into. All the guide really says here is that whatever he got, you should be able to defeat him with level 45 or so Pokemon if you play wisely and use a lot of potions. I lead with Nidoking to take care of his lead Sandslash, but it ends up fainting before I can knock the Sandslash out, so I send out Doug to finish it off. Doug then defeats every other member of his team up until his final Pokemon being Vaporeon. I decided to go into Pikachu here despite being a much lower level than the Vaporeon, and tried to finish out the run as it started with our 2 starter Pokemon duking it out. And just like in the very first rival battle we had at the start of the game, Pikachu ends up fainting to my rival starter, so I just send out Charizard to hammer it out since Vaporeon was so low and Charizard can easily kill it. And with that, we became the champion of the Kanto region and beat Pokemon Yellow